Welcome to Woo English. Have you ever wondered, what would happen if America stopped protecting Europe? What if Russia kept moving west, and Europe had no shield of its own? In this dramatic story, you will learn English while discovering the real struggle behind Europe's defense. It is a story of fear, power, and choices that will shape history. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Russian Shadow. A cold wind blows across Europe, from Kyiv to Donetsk, from the Black Sea to the Baltic. Fear is growing. Russia is moving. Tanks, missiles, soldiers. The war in Ukraine has begun. In every European capital, alarms ring. Politicians, soldiers, and families ask the same question. Can we protect ourselves if America walks away? For more than 70 years, Europe felt safe. After World War II, the United States became the protector. NATO was the shield. American soldiers, planes, and nuclear power guarded the continent. Europe grew rich. It trusted Washington to keep the peace. But now, things are different. Russia is bold. It attacks with tanks and bombs, but also with energy, propaganda, and cyber hacks. It plays a long game, slow, clever, and dangerous. The West feels weak. Europe sends money, weapons, and aid to Ukraine. It punishes Moscow with sanctions. But deep inside, everyone knows the truth. Europe has no real teeth, no united army, no strong defense of its own. In Paris, London, and Berlin, leaders speak with worry. What if the American umbrella disappears? What if Washington says, "You are on your own"? This fear is not new. In the past, U.S. presidents asked Europe to pay more for its defense. But Donald Trump said it most clearly. If you don't pay, we won't protect you. Those words shook Europe. Could it really happen? Then came the shock of 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. Missiles rained down on Kyiv. Tanks crossed the borders. It was the largest military attack in Europe since World War II. The Baltic states sent troops to their borders. Poland begged for more NATO soldiers. Even Germany, known for its soft defense, promised 100 billion euros to rebuild its army. But money alone is not enough. Europe is divided. It talks about building an army, yet every plan depends on Washington. Russia watches carefully. Putin knows the West hesitates. He has tested it before. Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, and now full war in Ukraine. Every time, he moved forward. Every time, the West reacted too slowly. Putin believes Europe is weak without America. And maybe he is right. Ordinary people feel the fear too. In Poland, families remember past invasions. In Estonia and Latvia, old men whisper about Soviet times. They know how close the Russian border is. News channels show missiles hitting Ukrainian cities. Mothers cry. Fathers send their sons to fight. Refugees run west, searching for safety. The shadow of Russia is long. And it is moving closer. Europe faces a question it has avoided for decades. Can we survive without America? Some leaders, like Emmanuel Macron in France, say, we must build our own shield. Others wait for Washington to decide. But every day of waiting gives Putin more power. The Russian army is not the only weapon. Moscow uses gas pipelines as political tools. It spreads lies in the media. It attacks power grids with hackers. War today is not only tanks and bombs. It is information. It is energy. It is fear. Now, Europe must choose. Stay under the American umbrella forever, or finally build an army of its own? The question is no longer just theory. It is a matter of survival. Chapter 2: A History of Dependence. Europe was not always weak. Long ago, it ruled the world. Empires stretched from London to Paris to Berlin. But after 2 world wars, Europe was broken. Cities burned, economies collapsed, millions died. After 1945, one truth was clear. Europe could not protect itself. The United States stepped in. It became the new protector. In 1949, NATO was born. American soldiers, planes, and nuclear bombs defended Europe. The message was simple. If anyone attacks you, we will fight for you. For decades, this system worked. The Soviet Union was strong, but NATO was stronger. Europe grew rich and peaceful. Wars were far away. But there was a cost. Europe became dependent. Why spend money on armies if America paid the bill? Why build weapons if Washington kept the nukes? Germany, France, Italy, Spain? One by one, they cut defense budgets. Healthcare, schools, and roads became more important than tanks. For many Europeans, war felt impossible. The Cold War ended. The Berlin Wall fell. Russia became weak. Years passed. Americans started to complain. They asked, why should we protect Europe for free? U.S. presidents, Bush, Obama, and especially Trump, told Europe to spend more on defense. But most countries still spent less than 2% of their GDP on armies. Europe smiled politely and kept relying on Washington. Then came a shock. Russia began to rise again. It rebuilt its army. It invaded Georgia in 2008. It took Crimea in 2014. Yet Europe still believed America would always be there. Donald Trump changed the mood. He said openly, "If you don't pay, we won't protect you." Those words were like thunder in Europe. For the first time in 70 years, leaders asked, what if America walks away? This fear grew stronger when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Suddenly, Europe saw tanks and missiles on its doorstep. It realized a terrible truth. It had no shield of its own. Now, the old system is breaking. Europe must choose. Stay forever dependent on Washington, or build real power at last. But building power takes courage, it takes money, and it takes unity, something Europe does not have. Chapter 3: The Shock of 2022. It was a cold February morning. The date: 24th February 2022. The world woke up to terrible news. Russia had invaded Ukraine. Missiles hit Kiev at dawn. Explosions shook the air. Tanks rolled across the borders. Helicopters flew low over burning towns. For millions of Ukrainians, life changed in one night. Families packed small bags. Mothers held their children tightly. Men said goodbye and went to fight. But it was not only Ukraine that felt the shock. All of Europe was shaken. For the first time since World War II, a huge army had attacked a European country. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, felt the danger first. They remembered Soviet occupation. They feared they could be next. Poland sounded the alarm. Its leaders called NATO. "Send more soldiers. We need help now." Even Germany, famous for its soft defense policy, finally woke up. Chancellor Olaf Scholz stood in Parliament and said, "This is a turning point in history." Germany promised 100 billion euros to rebuild its army. For a country that avoided war for decades, this was a shocking decision. But soon, a dark truth appeared. Even with new money, Europe had no real power. It had no united army. Its weapons were old. Its air defenses were weak. Europe could send sanctions. It could send money. It could even send some weapons. But it could not stop Russia. Meanwhile, Russia used more than just bombs. It cut gas supplies to Europe. Winter became colder. Energy prices exploded, factories stopped, families paid double, sometimes triple for heating. Russia also used propaganda. Fake news spread across social media. Hackers attacked power grids and banks. War was not just on the battlefield. It was everywhere. European leaders met in Brussels, Paris, London, and Berlin. They made speeches. They promised unity. They sent billions of euros to Ukraine. But Putin was watching. He saw hesitation. He saw division. Every day, Russia moved forward. And every day, Europe reacted too slowly. Some leaders, like Emmanuel Macron, said, "Europe must act. We need real soldiers on the ground." But others feared escalation. What if Russia attacked NATO directly? Would America defend them? The question grew louder. What if America leaves us alone? Ordinary Europeans felt the fear too. In Poland, people lined up to buy food and fuel. In Latvia, soldiers trained in forests, ready for war. In Germany, families discussed building shelters again. Things they hadn't thought about in 70 years. The invasion of Ukraine was more than a war. It was a wake-up call. It showed that peace in Europe was fragile. It showed that Russia was willing to use force. And it showed that Europe was not ready. For decades, Europe believed war was history. Now, war was back. Real, violent, and close. And one question became impossible to ignore. Can we protect ourselves, or are we just waiting for America? The old system, NATO with America in charge, still worked for now. But everyone knew the truth. If Washington decided to step back, Europe would be defenseless. The shock of 2022 was not only about tanks and bombs. It was about fear. Fear that Europe was too weak. Fear that history might repeat itself. And while leaders argued and hesitated, Putin kept moving. Step by step. City by city. The world had changed. Europe could no longer hide behind words. The question now was simple. Would it finally build its own shield before it was too late? Chapter 4. Macron's bold idea. The war in Ukraine was getting worse. Cities were burning. Millions had left their homes. Europe watched. and still felt powerless. In Paris, the French President Emmanuel Macron spoke clearly. He said words that shocked many leaders. Europe must act. We cannot always wait for America. For decades, Macron had warned about Europe's weakness. Now, he wanted action. Macron's plan was bold. He proposed sending real European troops to Ukraine, but not to fight Russia directly. These troops would be a guarantee force. They would stay in specific areas. They would show that Europe is serious. The idea was simple. If Russia attacked these European soldiers, it would mean war with all of Europe. It was a symbol, a message to Putin. Do not test us. Some leaders liked the idea. It sounded strong. It sounded brave. But others were afraid. Without American support, planes, weapons, nuclear power, European troops would be easy targets. What if Russia saw them as weak? What if Putin used this as a reason to attack even more? Macron knew the risk. He understood that Europe still needed the U.S. military. But he also believed that Europe had to start somewhere. He said again and again, "We need a real European force, not just words, not just sanctions." Many ordinary Europeans agreed. They were tired of waiting for Washington. They wanted Europe to take responsibility. But there was a problem. Europe was divided. Poland and the Baltic states liked the idea. They feared Russia the most. Germany hesitated. Italy doubted it. Some countries wanted NATO to decide everything. Meanwhile, Putin continued his war. He was watching closely. Every time Europe hesitated, he became bolder. Macron's plan became the center of debate. Could Europe really send soldiers without America's approval? Would Washington support it? And what about Donald Trump? He had already said, "If you don't pay, we won't protect you." What if he became president again? Would he leave NATO completely? Macron's words made many leaders uncomfortable. For years, Europe had relied on America. It was easy, safe, cheap. Building a real European army would be expensive. It would take time. It would need political courage. But Macron refused to stay silent. He believed that history had given Europe a choice: stay weak and dependent, or finally stand on its own feet. He said, "Europe cannot be free if it cannot defend itself." Still, the fear of Russia was real. What if a small mistake led to a bigger war? What if Putin saw the troops as a provocation? Some leaders whispered in private, "Maybe it is better to wait. Maybe America will save us again." But others warned, "Waiting will only make us weaker." As Macron pushed for action, Europe stood at a crossroads. One path led to independence, the other to endless dependence on Washington. The decision was not just military. It was about identity, about the kind of Europe people wanted. Would Europe finally build its own shield? Or would it remain forever under America's shadow? The debate grew louder. The world was watching, and Putin he was smiling. Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Trump's Warning. The war in Ukraine was still raging. Europe was debating, arguing, waiting. And then, across the ocean, another storm was rising. In the United States, former President Donald Trump spoke again. His words were sharp. His tone was cold. "Europe is not paying enough," he said. "If you don't pay, we will not protect you." For decades, America had been Europe's shield. U.S. soldiers, planes, and nuclear power kept the continent safe. But now, Trump was questioning it all. To many Europeans, this was terrifying. Could the United States really walk away? Trump believed Europe was rich but lazy. He said Americans were tired of paying for Europe's defense. He wanted European countries to spend more money on their armies. NATO had a rule. Each country should spend 2% of its GDP on defense. But many nations, Germany, Italy, Spain, spent far less. Trump's warning was clear. Why should American taxpayers protect you if you refuse to protect yourselves? These words felt like thunder in Europe. Some leaders were angry. Others were afraid. What if Trump returned to the White House? Would NATO fall apart? Would America really abandon Europe? In private meetings, European officials whispered their fears. For years, they had trusted Washington completely. Now, that trust was breaking. Russia was watching closely. Putin saw division. He saw weakness. Every day that Europe delayed building its own power, Russia grew stronger. Trump's warning forced a hard question. What is Europe without America? Without U.S. troops, without U.S. nuclear weapons, without U.S. money, could Europe defend itself? For decades, European leaders had avoided this question. It was easier to depend on Washington. It was cheaper. It felt safe. But the world had changed. Russia was no longer weak. China was growing stronger. And America was looking inward. Trump's words also had another effect. Some Europeans began to agree with him. They asked themselves, why are we so dependent? Why can't we protect ourselves? Macron's voice grew louder. Europe must be able to defend itself, with or without America. But building a real army takes time. It takes billions of euros. It takes unity, something Europe has always struggled with. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine continued. Missiles kept falling. Cities kept burning. Refugees kept running west. And still, Europe was waiting. Trump's warning felt like a clock ticking. Every speech, every interview reminded Europe that America might not always be there. Some European countries finally started to spend more on defense. Poland built new bases. The Baltic states trained harder. But big countries like Germany and Italy still hesitated. Trump was not the only problem. Other American politicians also questioned NATO. They asked, why should we risk American lives for Europe? The fear was real. The U.S. might one day leave Europe alone. For Putin, this was good news. He knew that a divided Europe would never be strong. As 2023 and 2024 passed, the question grew louder. Will America still protect us? But an even bigger question appeared. If America says no, what will we do? The answer was not clear. Some leaders wanted a European army. Others wanted to stay under Washington's umbrella forever. Trump's warning had changed everything. Europe could no longer pretend. The old world was gone. A new one was coming. And Europe had to decide: be strong and independent, or stay weak and dependent forever. Chapter 6. The Coalition of the Willing. Europe was divided. Some countries wanted bold action. Others wanted to wait for Washington. But the war in Ukraine was not waiting. Every day, bombs fell. Every day, people died. Then came a new idea. The Coalition of the Willing. It started in London. Britain's new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, spoke with urgency. He said, "If NATO cannot act together, let those who are willing act alone." The idea was simple. Instead of waiting for all 31 NATO members to agree, a group of countries could join forces. They could send weapons, technology, even soldiers, with or without NATO's official approval. Poland liked the idea. So did the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They lived closest to Russia. They understood the danger better than anyone. These countries wanted to show strength. They believed that hesitation was deadly. But not everyone agreed. Germany and Italy were worried. They feared that acting outside NATO could split the alliance. If Europe acted alone, would America feel betrayed? The Coalition of the Willing was risky. It could send a strong message to Putin, or it could provoke him to escalate. Starmer knew this. He said carefully, "We must help Ukraine, but we must not start World War III." Still, the idea spread. Many leaders were tired of endless meetings, tired of waiting for Washington, tired of watching Ukraine burn while Europe did nothing. Ordinary Europeans supported the plan. Protests grew in many cities. People shouted, "Help Ukraine now! Act now!" They saw refugees in train stations. They saw families torn apart. They wanted their leaders to be brave. But fear was everywhere. What if Putin used nuclear weapons? What if Russian troops crossed NATO borders? These questions froze decision-making. Every day of delay made Europe look weaker. The Coalition of the Willing became a symbol. It showed that some countries still had courage, but it also revealed Europe's biggest weakness: a lack of unity. Behind closed doors, leaders argued. Should Europe rely only on NATO? Or should it act on its own if NATO stayed silent? The debate grew hotter. Macron supported the idea of more independence. Poland wanted immediate action, but Germany and Italy blocked many proposals. Putin watched and waited. He loved division. Every time Europe argued, he grew stronger. The Coalition of the Willing was not yet real. It was just a plan, a hope. But it raised a powerful question. Does Europe really need America to defend freedom? For 70 years, the answer had always been yes. But now, maybe that was changing. Still, without American planes, bases, and nuclear weapons, any European force would be weak. Macron knew it. Starmer knew it. Even Poland knew it. But they also knew one more thing. Doing nothing was the most dangerous choice of all. The coalition showed a new path. A path where Europe could act, even if Washington refused. But was Europe brave enough to take it? No one knew. The war continued. The bombs kept falling, and Europe's time to decide was running out. Chapter 7. A European Army? The debates in Europe grew louder. Some leaders wanted small coalitions. Others wanted NATO to stay in charge. But a new idea was rising. A united European army. The plan was ambitious. It called for 25,000 elite soldiers. They would be fast, mobile, and well-trained. They could be sent anywhere in Europe within hours. This force would be fully European. No American planes. No American bases. No American nuclear power. The goal was simple. Europe must be able to defend itself. For decades, European countries had armies, but they were separate, small, and weak. A single united force could change that. It would give Europe power, real power. France and Poland supported the plan. The Baltic states also liked it. They knew Russia would test them sooner or later. But Germany hesitated. Italy doubted it. They worried about the cost. Billions of euros would be needed. New bases, weapons, planes, and tanks had to be built. Some leaders feared the politics even more. Would a European army make NATO weaker? Would America feel abandoned? Supporters of the plan said, "We are not leaving NATO. We are just becoming stronger partners." But critics replied, "Europe is divided. It cannot even agree on migration or energy. How can it agree on war?" Still, the idea of a European army refused to die. The invasion of Ukraine had changed everything. Europeans no longer felt safe. Ordinary people asked, "Why do we always wait for Washington? Why can't we protect ourselves?" For many citizens, pride was part of the answer. Europe was rich and powerful, economically, but militarily, it was weak. This weakness felt shameful. The plan for a European army became a symbol of independence. It was not just about soldiers. It was about dignity. It was about freedom. But time was short. Russia was still attacking Ukraine. Putin was watching closely. Every day of delay made Europe look weaker. Every day of argument gave Russia more courage. The European army was still only an idea. It had no bases, no weapons, no commander. But some leaders believed it was Europe's best hope. Macron said, "We must build this force. We cannot be free if we cannot defend ourselves." Others still hoped America would stay forever. They preferred the comfort of the old system. It was easier, safer, cheaper. The question was now clear. Would Europe take control of its own destiny, or remain a follower forever. The decision would not just shape politics, it would shape history. Because if Russia saw Europe as weak, the danger would only grow. The debate about a European army was no longer just theory. It was about survival. It was about the future of the entire continent. But unity was still missing. And without unity, power is just a dream. Chapter 8. Fear, Division, and Delay. The idea of a European army was on the table. Leaders met. They argued. They gave long speeches. But still, there was no decision. France and Poland pushed forward. "We must act now," they said. "Every day of delay makes us weaker." The Baltic states agreed. They lived closest to Russia. They could feel the danger in every border town. But Germany hesitated. Italy was cautious. Spain and others stayed silent. Money was one problem. Billions of euros were needed. Who would pay? Who would lead? But fear was the bigger problem. Some leaders worried about Russia. "If we act too boldly, Putin might attack," they said. Others worried about America. "If we build our own army, Washington might feel betrayed." So, meetings ended with no real action. Statements were made, but soldiers were never sent. The war in Ukraine continued. Cities kept burning. Families kept fleeing. Putin saw everything. He saw the endless debates. He saw the hesitation. And he smiled. Every time Europe argued, Russia grew stronger. Every time Europe delayed, Ukraine suffered more. Ordinary Europeans became frustrated. They saw refugees at train stations. They saw the fear on TV. People began asking hard questions. Why are our leaders so weak? Why do we always wait for America? Protests started in some cities. Citizens shouted for action. But leaders still feared the cost, the risk, and the political backlash. Inside NATO meetings, the division was clear. Some countries wanted bold steps. Others wanted caution. Macron kept warning. "We cannot wait forever. Russia will not stop by itself." But his voice was not enough. Germany worried about its history. It feared leading any military force. Italy worried about its economy. It already had debt problems. And Britain, outside the EU, was unsure how far to go without America. The result was paralysis. Nothing happened. No united army. No real power. Just more words. Meanwhile, Russian attacks grew worse. Missiles hit power plants. Millions of Ukrainians had no heat or electricity. Winter was brutal. Europe sent blankets, aid, and promises. But not soldiers. Some experts warned that delay was the biggest danger. Putin tests the West. If we fail to act, he will act more. History gave many examples. Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, and now all of Ukraine in 2022. Every time, Russia moved forward because the West hesitated. Still, Europe did not unite. Fear won. Division grew. Time passed. By 2024, it was clear. Europe had lost precious years. While it argued, Putin prepared for the next step. The dream of a strong Europe was still alive. But dreams mean nothing without action. The continent stood still, while danger moved closer every day. Chapter 9. The Final Question. Europe was running out of time. The war in Ukraine had lasted for years. Cities were destroyed. Millions of lives were changed forever. And still, Europe had no answer. Two paths lay ahead. One path was familiar. Stay under America's protection. Hope that Washington would never leave. Keep relying on U.S. planes, soldiers, and nuclear weapons. The other path was risky. Build a real European defense, spend billions, train soldiers, take responsibility at last. But the choice was painful. It meant more taxes. It meant harder politics. It meant standing up to Putin without hiding behind America. France, Poland, and the Baltic states were ready. They were tired of waiting. Macron spoke again. Europe must be free. We cannot be free if we cannot defend ourselves. Poland's leaders warned, if Ukraine falls, we are next. But Germany and Italy still hesitated. Old fears and old habits were hard to break. Donald Trump's shadow hung over everything. He might return to power. And if he did, would America abandon NATO? Nobody knew. In Washington, some politicians asked hard questions too. Why should we risk American lives for Europe? Why pay for countries that are rich but weak? The message was clear. The U.S. might not always be there. Europe's dependence had become a trap. It was safe. Until one day, it wasn't. Meanwhile, Russia waited. Putin understood one thing better than anyone. The West fears bold decisions. Every time Europe delayed, he grew stronger. Ordinary Europeans saw the danger. They remembered history. 2 world wars, dictators, invasions. Many asked, are we repeating the same mistakes? The dream of a strong, united Europe was still alive. But dreams mean nothing without action. The final question hung over the continent like a dark cloud. Would Europe finally build its own shield? Or would it remain forever under America's shadow, waiting, hoping, and fearing, while history repeated itself? The answer was not in Washington. It was not in Moscow. It was in Paris, Berlin, Warsaw, and every European capital. Because in the end, freedom is never free. It must be protected by those who want it most. The clock was ticking. The world was watching. And Europe had to decide. Be strong or stay weak. History does not wait, and neither will Russia.